Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, our program is about to begin. Please welcome Bennett Richardson, General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs at Semaphore.
Great. Welcome to this afternoon's session at Semaphore's 2025 World Economy Summit, Small Businesses and Startups, Access and Opportunity. I'm Bennett Richardson, Semaphore's General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs. Semaphore is the world's fastest growing independent news platform, which we're very proud of. It's wonderful to see you all packing the room this morning, to see so many familiar faces. Semaphore is not even 3 years old yet, but we were built to help leaders like yourselves find clarity in an increasingly interconnected world, while it's also becoming increasingly fractured and shaped by polarization. And our goal is to really keep our coverage fair-minded, independent, and global to help you navigate this new landscape. And for those of you who this is your first time joining us, the World Economy Summit is our dedicated platform to advancing the dialogues we believe are those most consequential, those that strengthen resilience, catalyze global growth amidst our uncertain and shifting global economy. And no more important place to have that conversation than with our youngest and highest potential companies, with small businesses and startups. Huge technological shifts happening, geopolitical tensions, big economic hurdles facing our smallest companies around the country and around the globe. And we're really excited to hear from all sorts of different voices this afternoon, those building, funding, rethinking how small businesses and startups operate, from crypto leaders to big and small kind of micro investors, and how Republicans in Washington are thinking about jumpstarting the economy. And to kick that conversation off, we've got a great both economic and geopolitical perspective. Please join me in welcoming Ian Bremmer, who's president and founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media. Thanks so much.
Let's just dig right in, because by the time we're done with this conversation, 7 other major things may have been announced or changed or perceived to have changed, depending on what the market's view of a specific tweet or truth.
Well, given where we are right now, that's probably would be a good thing, so yes.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, let's be careful here. Your team puts together top risks at the start of each year, the annual top risks, and your 2025 version, I was rereading it over the weekend, and was struck by, 1, how ominous it was, 2, how prescient it was on so many levels. I'm interested, what do you wish 100 days into this administration you could go back and change about that you didn't expect, or that maybe you got wrong?
I wish we'd gotten more wrong this year. It was a pretty ominous piece at a time that we got a lot of pushback. The piece that I was surprised, I've been most surprised by, and maybe I'm about to become less surprised by it, but at least for the first 3 months, has been the role of Elon Musk. I mean, I certainly knew how much money he was giving. I was not expecting that he was going to spend as much time becoming the second most influential person in the White House at the opening. And that level of, call it creative destruction, in the Trump administration was surprising to me. But that's probably the one big thing.
And just to tie into that, you mentioned Musk in the report itself with specificity to China and the potential whether or not there was going to be any connection there. We haven't necessarily seen that borne out in terms of how the Trump administration's foreign policy has worked. However, we have seen, I think, a clear rupture in what was already a rather tenuous bilateral relationship. And you laid out how you thought China would respond to an escalatory tariff regime. You said agricultural imports, export controls on critical minerals, investigations to curb market access into U.S. companies, all of which have happened.
All of which have happened, yeah.
Explain, as we all try and figure out between China's FM and whatever Trump says every 30 minutes, where the relationship is right now.
It's funny, when you said the rupture, I thought you were going to talk about Elon Musk and Scott Bessent, right? Because that is clearly a rupture as well. We'll see where it goes. I don't see this Chinese government finding its way to yes with the United States anytime soon. Let's keep in mind, it's not only that their senior leadership considers present tariff levels a joke, and I use that word literally, but also because such a big component of the negotiations that are happening right now between the United States and over 100 other economies, it's not just about their tariffs, it's not just about market access, it's also about aligning strategy in a decoupling with China. So the Chinese are not okay with that, right? So that is not fixable in my view. It's also not fixable because this is not something that Trump and Xi can do by themselves. You actually need a very strong team that is aligned, that can execute on what such a deal would look like. And this team cannot do that, not with the Chinese. With Japanese, sure. You know, with the Mexicans and Canadians, sure, not with the Chinese. So I think that I think it is inconceivable that we can get back to the status quo ante U.S.-China relationship pre-Liberation Day under this administration. Inconceivable.
The Trump administration economic officials are unrelenting in their belief that they can win a drawn-out trade conflict. I think Chinese leadership has maintained, now we're better positioned for that.
Wall Street Journal editorial board has just said that today. That's right. Yeah.
Near-term, long-term, China's role, if this continues down the path it's been on, where does that leave China?
Well, the Chinese economy is going to get hit a lot worse as a consequence of all this. About 2.5% of their GDP is dependent directly on this export to the United States, and that's not even talking about transshipments, right? So it's a big deal. But long-term, the principal beneficiary of the Americans engaging in unprecedented acts of geopolitical self-harm is China. That should be obvious to every single person in this room. My good friend Ken Griffin yesterday talking about the damage that the Americans are doing to the brand, and he's been a huge funder of the GOP and of Trump. He knows what is happening. He does not want to have to be saying that. He's saying that. Why? Because the Americans shutting down USAID means less influence across the global south, where the Chinese are increasingly dominant. The Americans pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord again and pulling away from government conversations on sustainability. Chinese are dominant in that technology suite and the supply chain. They'll be dominant in the COP summits going forth. World Health Organization. I mean, you know, on and on and on. The long-term geostrategic opportunities are for the number two, as the Americans say, not it. Don't want to drive collective security. Don't want to drive free trade. Don't want to drive rule of law. Don't want to drive exported democracy. Well, who's in the best position to pick up as a consequence of that? China, China, and China.
You don't believe I think somewhat belated, but certainly we've seen threads of kind of a bilateral version of a TPP in the sense of bringing in South Korea, bringing in Japan, saying allies in the Indo-Pacific we're going to have bilateral trade deals or trade negotiations with, the idea being isolate China, leave them alone to take the pain. That won't have the effect in terms of the alliances.
Very plausible strategy if that's what you're trying to do. But if you want to do that, then you don't pick fights with your best allies simultaneously with China and your judiciary and your legislative process and your law firms and your universities and everyone else you can point to. I mean, look, for Trump to be successful, right, it's not just that he needs to overrun checks and balances on the presidency, domestically and internationally. He also has to be the effective apex predator. He has to be able to implement on I'm the strongest. And he's doing a pretty good job in, sort of ignoring USMCA. He's doing a pretty good job in ignoring a ruling of the Supreme Court, right? When a good job, I use that term advisedly. He's being effective at it. Point is, he's not doing a good job at getting the outcomes he wants in picking fights with everyone simultaneously. So, I mean, even if he had had a level of very significant trust with the Japanese and the Europeans and the Canadians coming in, which he did not, he's done so much in his power to further erode that trust over the past 3 months that they're going to find every which way to say that we are not going to follow you on China.
I could do this for about 2 hours with you, but I think one of the fights picked, sort of, depending on the day, is Ukraine, Russia, where this is going to go going forward. Yeah. Kind of an ultimatum laid down. Maybe the U.S. is just going to walk away. Trump went after Zelensky last night, went after Putin this morning. Today said, from a leverage perspective or from a concessions perspective, Russia not taking over Ukraine is a pretty big concession. Break through all that. Where does it stand right now?
I clearly don't think it's reasonable to treat the Russians and Ukrainians in the same way. The Russians are responsible singularly for the actual invasion, and Trump has not acted that way. But I also recognize that Trump's willingness to use real pressure on the Ukrainians when he suspended intelligence and defense aid, did make the Ukrainians take him seriously, not just on the critical minerals deal, but also in accepting a ceasefire without conditions, which Biden could have done and did not. I give Trump full marks for that. But he has not been willing to use any of that pressure on Putin, and Putin has responded, as one might expect, by refusing to engage meaningfully on a ceasefire. So you're right that this morning we saw Trump post that he was unhappy with Putin killing a bunch of civilians in Kiev. Fair enough. I am also unhappy with that. I think that where we are heading right now, the most likely path, is that Trump is unwilling to put sufficient pressure on the Russians to get them to yes. He's unwilling to blame the Russians singularly for it falling apart and him not being able to get the deal that he has promised as a pretty high priority for well over a year now. And as a consequence, he walks away from both countries, which means no more U.S. aid for the Ukrainians, and it also means no rapprochement with Russia. That's where I think we are heading right now, and there are very significant geopolitical and economic implications that stem from that.
What happens if that decision is made? To walk away?
To walk away?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Europeans are doing a lot more.
Right.
And walking away is very different from Trump calling Putin for 90 minutes, not telling the Europeans, and doing a deal with Russia over their heads. So it is not the worst possible scenario. It is one where Trump will feel like, look, this is a European problem. Europeans are going to have to solve it. I tried. They're both idiots. I'm not going to do it. In the near term, Europe will provide an awful lot of support for Ukraine. And will that support be adequate to allow the Ukrainians to continue to defend their front lines? That is a very important question. Will the Europeans be able to stand up security guarantees that will deter the Russians from going after all of Ukraine and from removing this Zelensky administration, which continues to be an active priority of Putin? That is an open question. Will the EU be able to hold together in support of Ukraine when they are not acting in contradiction to the Americans, but they're doing it almost completely by themselves? What we've seen from incoming Chancellor Merz in Germany sounds really good on that front. They are the largest, they are the wealthiest, they have the most fiscal space. Is that going to work? Will other countries align with it? Will the EU hold together? And for how long? These are all things we're going to get to find out over the coming couple of years.
One of the things that I always love about talking to you is, and I don't mean this in a way to underplay your expertise, you're kind of like a reporter, but your sources are better than all of ours. You are constantly in conversation with global leaders, with CEOs, with all of the players that matter across really the globe. And I wanted to see in the last 4 minutes we got left, we kind of globetrot, region by region, in this moment at 100 days into this administration, where things stand geopolitically, and starting with Europe.
Okay. Where things stand European?
Yeah, we got like 10 seconds per.
So what do you give me a slightly better sense, so then I'll do it effectively.
You gave kind of the Russia-Ukraine perspective of the EU. More broadly, the macro perspective, so the EU in this moment.
So the very quick perspective is that the biggest difference between Biden and Trump geopolitically is that Biden believes a strong EU is in America's advantage, and Trump does not. He wants Brexit all over the place. And he does believe, and many around him do, that the Europeans are one electoral cycle behind the US. So that if he puts more pressure on, that over time, you're going to get AfD and far left in Germany, gets rid of the center, Reform Party in the UK, conservatives fall apart, maybe National Rally in France, though there's some hair on that. And all of that would mean the Americans could negotiate individually with European states as opposed to having to deal with a much stronger collective EU. That is a danger, and the Europeans are in a really vulnerable position going forward.
Indo-Pacific.
Indo-Pacific, very hard to imagine. I mean, look, I think that permanent damage has been done to the US-EU relationship. Permanent. I think sometimes you have a relationship with somebody, they do something that is shocking to you. You can't unsee it. I think that has happened between the US and the Europeans. It has not happened in the Indo-Pacific. When I think about Japan, South Korea, India, I think that what is at stake appears less existential. The rattling to the relationship is challenging, but they'll be able to get through it. I think that the US relationship will remain strong, and they will still be able to engage economically in ways that are comfortable to them with the Chinese.
North America.
USMCA, the Americans have abrogated. The Mexicans will do everything possible to capitulate to US terms. They've done a lot already on the border. They've done a lot already in terms of allowing the Americans in on gangs. They're doing a lot even on water and taking it away from their farmers to make good on the US treaty, transshipments from China. She's got 85% approval. She can get away with that. Canada, I think that the Canadians now believe that their relationship with the US is as strategically as much of a mistake as Germans doing Nord Stream with Russia. And the question is, how long will it take them to de-risk their relationship with America? Shocking. Shocking. The biggest own goal that the Americans have made in the last 3 months. And I am using the term Americans. I really dislike people pointing to Trump and saying Trump is responsible for this stuff, when he is being absolutely supported, when he is being allowed to engage without people being courageous and yelling against it, when it's the second time you voted for him, when you know exactly what you were getting. No. This is America's responsibility. And absolutely. And I am not going to sit here and say that, Trump leaves and then it's fine. Not true. And Canada has been the single biggest own goal that I've seen in 3 months, and we're going to make it worse.
That would be a great way to end it, but I'm fascinated to hear your response to Gulf states. They are quiet.
No, they're happy.
Probably have the best relationship with this White House as anybody.
Yeah.
What's their standing right now?
Well, I mean, look, part of the reason why the U.S., I think, wants to engage more with Russia under Trump is because they are much more transactional. They're much more capable of opening the cash register. That is the way that a lot of Gulf monarchies work. So, I mean, they understand how to get on with Trump. If you pay Trump, Trump will do stuff. Ask Jeff Yass and the flip on TikTok, right? That works for the Gulf states. That's why he's going there first. He hasn't even announced an Israel trip, but he's going across the Gulf. So I think they're in a very strong political position. They're in a very strong geopolitical position. They're in an incredibly strong economic position, and they're trying really hard to get themselves in a very strong technological position, and the Americans can help. So in that regard, Gulf has nothing but upside in this environment.
Ian Bremmer, appreciate it, my friend.
Good to see you, man.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Please welcome Josh Silverman, CEO of Etsy. Phil Mattingly, Chief Domestic Correspondent and anchor at CNN, will remain on stage.
Good luck matching
I was
that.
just going to say, thank you for, Justin, wherever you are, for putting me right after Ian. Very grateful for that.
You got earnings in, 5 days, I
See if
think?
we can keep it spicy.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you very much for doing this.
it's a
I
pleasure.
got to say, I was poring over the beige book, Fed's beige book yesterday, and it suddenly dawned on me, what you guys do is kind of your own version of the beige book in terms of your visibility into a marketplace right now. And your company has done a laudable job trying to explain to your, I think, roughly 6 million sellers at the end of last year, what exactly is happening right now.
Yeah.
And I'm interested, we hear constantly from CEOs about the uncertainty, what that means. On a micro business level, people that you work with, what is this moment like?
Well, let me take just a minute to set the table for folks who aren't as familiar with Etsy. We've got actually, between our brands, about 8 million sellers. These are almost entirely businesses of one, working from home, making something with their own 2 hands, sourced locally from their own, usually their own community. We have people in almost every county in America. 25% of them work in rural areas. So this is truly makers in the most authentic sense. And they are doing the best they can to navigate in an incredibly uncertain world. So our job, I think, is at least twofold. One is to provide good communication so that they understand, to the best of anyone's knowledge, what the current state of play is. We're doing that with sellers so that they can be prepared, and also buyers. So buyers understand we've got over 60 million items for sale in America, made by Americans, if you don't want to pay tariffs. But the other thing we're doing is we're very active advocating in Washington and in Brussels and in other places to be the voice of the independent entrepreneur. There's 58 million people in America who are independent workers. They are not part of a big company. They don't get a W-2. 58 million workers out there, and they don't have a company telling them how to navigate this. They don't have a customs department or a finance department to tell them how to manage taxes. So our job is to make sure that we can advocate on behalf of not just the 8 million Etsy sellers, but the 50 million independent workers in America, to make sure that we can avoid one-size-fits-all policies. Because so many of the policies we're talking about right now are targeting the largest manufacturers, the largest retailers, and these independent workers. They may be plumbers, they may be Etsy sellers, they may be fitness instructors, but they're collateral damage if we're not careful. So we really try to be a voice for these people.
Collateral damage has been an effective pitch from, say, Tim Cook on trying to get exemptions or delays or carve-outs. Do you think there's a carve-out perhaps in the works or in the offing on your side?
Well, I don't know about carve-out, but I would say if we're prepared to make exemptions for Apple, shouldn't we be prepared to look after a single mother working from her home, making something and selling it to someone else? And so what we're very focused on are what's called de minimis exemptions, or small parcel exemptions. So in the United States, you can bring an item into the United States, and if its value is less than $800, that's not subject to customs or duties. That means it's not going to wait a week to get inspected, and then it's not going to get whatever the tariff is. Now, there are folks who are abusing that. There are folks, for example, in Asia, who might ship a full container of product of 1,000 identical items, get to the port in Los Angeles, and then describe that as 1,000 different individual packages and take advantage of the de minimis exemption. There is some common sense reform that should happen there. But for the actual small business, for that American woodworker who's going to make something and 3 times a year they're going to ship it to a buyer in Paris or in England, they have no idea how to navigate customs and duties. It would blow their mind to try to learn that. These are carpenters or craftsmen, And so our job is both to make sure that we can make that as easy as possible on our side for them, but also to advocate. We think de minimis exemptions are actually incredibly important. This would be our version of that, is to maintain the de minimis exemptions for the honest small sellers, working with trusted trading partners like Europe, like Canada, to make sure that those people, that we can still allow people to start a business without causing too much friction. And that's the main thing that I'm concerned about, is it needs to become ever more easy to start a business. In this world where automation is changing the nature of work, the fastest growing part of the economy is actually businesses of one. And over 90% of all businesses are solo entrepreneurship. And when you think about what's happening with automation, Gen AI, the ability of one person to act like a much larger entity is ever greater. So that's the part of the economy we most want to safeguard, and we think de minimis is critical for it.
May 2nd, I think, is the date for the de minimis exemption for China and Hong Kong to go away. Do you have any sense, market writ large, not necessarily just for Etsy, but market writ large, what would happen if it went into place the way the administration has it planned?
Well, you speak specifically about China or all around the world?
Globally.
I think that there's a lot of honest actors that would be really hurt by that. Well, first of all, we lack the data infrastructure to be able to know. It sounds simple, just charge customs on everything. Well, who is it that's collecting? Let's say there's a seller in France who's made something and selling to a buyer in America. Is it the French shipping agent that's responsible for collecting that duty, or is it collected by the buyer in the United States? Let's say the French shipper collected it. What information did they collect from the sender to know what the package is, what's in the package, what the value of the package is, and then what do they pass to the US? Do they pass the fact that they already collected the revenue or not? Who's actually responsible for the money flow? How does that eventually ever reach the US Treasury? It turns out all the questions I'm asking right now are questions that there is not a good answer for. We simply do not have a reliable data infrastructure to allow for seamless interchange, and that's something we should fix. It's something we should fix. So we need to create that, but if you were to tomorrow flip a switch, or May 2nd flip a switch and say de minimis goes away, what you will see is literally millions of parcels building up at the point of departure or the point of arrival with no process in place to be able to understand where the money is, who owes what. It's going to grind small commerce to a halt.
I was struck a couple weeks ago, Scott Bessent gave a speech, and he made the point that the American dream isn't cheap goods. I'm paraphrasing here on some level. And he got a lot of criticism for it, but I think it's kind of a broader theory of the case that the administration has, kind of underpinning their trade policies. And I'm wondering, Etsy, which is kind of a bespoke marketplace, but it's also a marketplace that at least sources materials sometimes for those bespoke products. What's your sense of how you fit into that construct?
Yeah, well, first, I really appreciate the administration's, what I feel is authentic care for the working person, the working American. I do believe it comes from a place of genuine, authentic care for that person. Many of those people are Etsy sellers who wake up every day, who take their creative passion and turn it into an actual product they make with their own hands and they sell. And we want to support those people and we want to protect those people. And I know that many of these policies are intended to help our sellers. And honestly, from a first order effect, Etsy is probably better positioned than almost anyone in that if de minimis exemptions go away in China, where candidly I think there's a ton of abuse, but we maintain de minimis exemptions in Europe, between the US and Europe, I think that Etsy buyers and sellers will largely not have any impact from tariffs. However, if the result is inflation and American consumers feeling much poorer, that would be very bad for Etsy. That would be very bad for Etsy sellers. So what we most need is a vibrant economy with healthy US consumers to support our sellers. And then we want to do that within a construct of fair trade and common sense reform.
I mentioned the blog post, but also you kind of have a tools kit handbook. Sorry if I'm getting the title wrong.
Yeah, all good.
That was actually quite helpful to the extent anyone has any concrete information at this point. But you had a blog post a couple of days ago as well, kind of underscoring a similar message. But you said in part, while we continue to nurture and enable cross-border trade, at Etsy we understand that people are increasingly interested in shopping domestically. Yeah. What does that mean from a corporate perspective? How are you thinking through how to make sourcing, creating things inside the U.S., entirely inside the U.S. to sell? Are you incentivizing that? How are you working through that?
The good news is our sellers are largely doing that already. And so, the true test of it, we don't have like a great view into our seller supply chain all the way through their supply chain. We know they tell us that they buy about 90% of their raw materials from within a 50-mile radius of their home. So we know they're buying the product locally. We're not always sure where that product is originally coming from, their raw materials. But we saw During the supply chain lockups at the end of 2021 and 2022, remember when we were all tracking boats through the Suez Canal? And anybody remember that? We were very focused on that.
We were all very bored at that time.
But Etsy sellers managed flawlessly through that time. So that gave us a pretty good understanding that our sellers' supply chains are really quite resilient. And that's why we think that, for the most part, our sellers in the US and in other countries really do source their materials locally. Most of the value add is happening locally. And so support for trying to support local makers, we think is great. We just need to do it within a construct where, unfortunately, in this environment, nuance is not our friend. And some of these broad brush policies that are intended for others, in the nuance of that is you might really hurt 8 million Etsy sellers and 58 million independent workers. And we've got to make sure we take the time to be a little thoughtful and craft common sense reforms that can also protect the little folks.
But the speed and scale of the policy implementation, which I think has shocked everyone on some level. Yes, it was promised. Yes, he said he was going to do it. But the speed and size and kind of all-consuming nature of them, do you feel like there's opportunity to walk back ideas in a more tailored fashion?
Well, I mean, it's obviously up to the president. If
you have any insight into that, that would be helpful.
I believe that the administration is acting from what they believe is the best interests of our sellers. I believe they genuinely want to do the right thing.
But are they listening when you raise, or your sellers raise?
We had a constructive meeting just this morning with the National Economic Council talking about the importance of de minimis and some of the data exchange reforms that will need to be made before we can process small parcels and charge a tariff and do it in a way that does not create a billion package backlog. And so, we are absolutely reaching out to the administration. I believe they have a good faith interest in trying to do the right thing. They also feel a lot of urgency to get a lot done in the first 100 days of the Trump administration, and hopefully we can land in a good place.
You also have a vested interest in tax reform or the extension of the tax cuts for a very specific reason. I'm sure there's multiple elements of it. And it's another one of those situations where, we were talking about this backstage, I talked to my K Street friends who say, it's tough to know who to go to, and if I have an issue to raise, particularly if it's a more micro issue, how to actually get that in front of the right people in this moment in time. You have 6 million to 8 million advocates on some level, I think in every single congressional district.
Yeah.
How are you thinking through the process of ensuring that your specific issues are raised and understood?
One of the things we do is we do seller fly-ins. I mean, the advantage is we have sellers who are in literally every single congressional district and of every political persuasion. And we advocate on behalf of micro businesses generally. We're not parochial to what matters to Etsy. And those sellers are typically quite happy to get on a plane, come to Washington, and then go visit congressional offices with us or have meetings in the district. And in doing so, we really try to position ourselves as the voice of micro businesses. And the good news is that this is a bipartisan issue. Everybody wants folks like Etsy sellers to win. Everyone's rooting for us. So it's not that they are intentionally trying to hurt the smallest of businesses. It's just collateral damage. Our risk is that they don't notice. So that's where we really try to be quite active and quite visible. And we have a very talented team, some of whom are in the room right now, making sure that voice gets heard.
I think a specific issue for you guys is the 1099 threshold as it currently stands for normal people who maybe didn't have to deal with this a couple days ago on tax day. Explain why it matters right now, but also what you think the prospects are of getting the threshold changed.
It's actually really philosophically similar to the de minimis threshold. It doesn't make sense to delay a package for a $40 package for a week and a half to charge a $3 tariff on it. The actual government lost money on that process. In the same way, processing a tax filing for someone that owes no taxes is a ton of friction for a tax filer for no revenue for the IRS. And so there used to be a rule that said you had to file a 1099-K if you had 200 transactions and $20,000 of revenue. If you're an actual business that's likely to have made some profit and owes some taxes, the Biden administration lowered that to $600 of revenue with no minimum transaction threshold. So Etsy owns a marketplace called Reverb, which is musical instruments. If you bought a Fender Stratocaster for $1,000 and then you resold it on Etsy, on Reverb for $800, you don't owe taxes because you actually lost $200 in that transaction. You sold one guitar one time. You do not consider yourself a professional seller. But you would actually be required in the current law to file a 1099-K. And then you've got to think about things like, was there a profit on that transaction? Which for that person, they're not thinking like a business person. It's a ton of friction. And by the way, the government earns no money on it. So we think it makes sense to raise it either back to the original. There's 2 bills in Congress right now, raising it back to the original $20,000 threshold or even a $10,000 threshold. We're fine with either. Let's just make sure that by the time you've got to file a form, it's likely that you actually owe some taxes. And the most important thing, pulling back a little bit from 1099-K, let's make it easy to start a business in America. It should be easy to start a business in America. You know what one of the most popular career aspirations is for young people right now? Shocked when I learned this.
Journalist.
Actually, almost. Influencer. Influencer, top career aspiration for kids that are 18 years old. That's a job that didn't exist like 7 years ago, right? But that's an independent entrepreneur. That is a self-employed person. More and more people are growing up to be self-employed people. We need to make it easy to become self-employed and to grow your business. And hopefully someday you end up having 20, 50, 1,000, 50,000 employees.
I had to tuck away my inner old person curmudgeon when you said influencer. That's great. They're small business owners. One more, I'm kidding. One more policy question, then I want to ask a final big picture question. Care economy.
Yeah.
I spent many hours/years of my life during the Biden administration when I was at the White House covering those elements of, I think, Build Back Better that didn't make it through.
Yeah.
It's still a focus for you guys. And honestly, the question I have is, what's the vehicle? Like tax, there's a vehicle. Yeah. Tariffs, that's live. Care economy, healthcare, childcare, not healthcare, childcare, parents, care for parents. What's the vehicle are you looking at right now?
So first, let me just set the table on it very quickly. You're a father of 4, so you totally get it. What our sellers tell us is the number one thing holding them back from being more successful is time. And for most of them, that means their caregiving responsibilities. So about 85% of our sellers are women. 1 in 4 has a child in the home. They're either caring for their young children or their aging parents. And if you're a business of 1, there is no real caregiving support. And guess what? Paid time off is not a thing. When you're a business of 1, if you're not there to make the product and ship the product, revenue is 0 that day. So what our sellers are asking is for caregiving support, more access to caregiving, federal and state level. There are reconciliation bills in Congress right now where there would be an opportunity to provide federal support for caregiving. We need it to be affordable, and we need it to be more accessible, meaning more trained caregiving specialists. Let's lower some of the red tape so it's easier to create more caregiving places. And it turns out this is also a bipartisan issue, so it's just a matter of finding the right vehicle to get it through Congress. There are some reconciliations happening right now where we think there might be an opportunity to do so.
I have about 14 more questions. I think we got time for one. If you could step back, you have been an executive across multiple different industries, companies, have been a leader, a very high-profile leader in a lot of these spaces for a while. You don't look it. But this moment, what's it like as a CEO?
You know, I think the opportunity to have a positive impact at a time when it feels like it matters a lot is a tremendous privilege. And so I feel like every single person at Etsy, there's what we talk about a lot is it's an incredibly uncomfortable time right now to be an adult in this world. I have teenage kids. It can be an incredibly uncomfortable time to be a teenager. It feels like there's so much going on right now. I feel incredibly grateful that my day job, I feel, has a very positive impact on the world around us. And so focus on the things we can focus on, control what we can control. And I consider it a tremendous privilege and a great responsibility to be able to show up for the community who needs me at a time like this.
How visible is that community to you on a day-to-day basis? Like, are you seeing TikToks and Instagram posts and tweets about how you guys are doing, what's going wrong, what's going well?
We have 89 million buyers. And so I hardly bump into anyone who hasn't shopped on Etsy recently and doesn't want to tell me about it. In the green room, several people whose weddings were organized with Etsy, and I get feedback. I get feedback all day. Some of it very positive, some of it feedback. I love it. I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way. I love it.
Josh, thanks so much.
Thank you, Phil.
Appreciate the time.
Please welcome Sukhinder Singh Cassidy, CEO of Xero, and Yinka Adekoke, Africa editor at Semaphore.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here for the late sessions, we shall call them. It's a real pleasure, a real honor to have Sukhinder here to, talk about small businesses via your platform, via the work you guys have been doing. I thought, we could start off just sort of with a sort of big picture about how you fit into the ecosystem,
Sure.
the work that you're doing, and then we could get into some of the insights you have.
Sure, well, it's great to be here. Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, Xero is a small business cloud accounting platform. So think of us as helping small businesses digitize their back office. And alongside accounting or bookkeeping, which is our core product in the cloud, we allow you to do tax, payments, payroll, and then multiple what we call other jobs to be done. And we allow you to do that yourself. We allow you to do it together with your accountant and bookkeeper or financial advisor, or we allow them to do it on your behalf. And so we operate in about 180 different countries. Our biggest markets are the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and we're about, growing about 20% and just north of about 1.6 billion in revenue. So that perspective gives us, I think, a pulse on over 4 million small businesses use our product every day. And then, of course, the people who pay on our product get paid on our product. Allows us a vantage point into the ecosystem. And so every day we wake up, and Josh is a friend, so I was listening to his ending.
Right.
We also wake up every day thinking, we love what we do because we think we're the heartbeat of many economies. Helping small businesses thrive and be successful is why our employees get up every day and do what they do. And it is a really important aspect of digitization. In some cases, maybe the forgotten aspect. Because, of course, website building tools, tools to sell, to check out, to be able to be a creator on Etsy. Those things have existed for a while, but the back office of the SMB is still digitizing, and that has big ramifications.
I mean, that's the really fascinating thing about a company like yours in 180 countries, and many people might not have heard of the business if they're not running a small business themselves, right?
Correct.
And yet, you have real sort of insights from this platform. So, and to the excellent point you made about that, so many countries, so many economies depend on their small businesses to really. They're the engine. They're the heartbeat
Engine of growth, productivity, employment.
Exactly. So what are you seeing now? Because there are real concerns about the global economy and potential slowdown. What kind of insights are you getting from either the trends or the kind of services people are looking for on your platform?
Sure. So we obviously have a data set of our own, and we historically published something called XSBI, which is Xero Business Insights, Small Business Insights. But to give you a vantage point, there's some very enduring trends that are, in fact, exacerbated, I think, by the current uncertainty. So one of the most enduring trends for small businesses, and probably the biggest source of stress, as many of you will imagine, is cash flow.
Right.
Followed, particularly post-COVID, by the ability to hire and retain talent. Many of you know in the services businesses, there were large shortages of employment, and
Right.
It continues to be a high employment environment. But cash flow is number one, and I think, what does that mean? Well, if you think about, the uncertainty of tariffs, for example, that means the pressure on your cost of goods sold, your pricing ramifications to your own customers, what might be the ramifications of increased prices on lower demand. All of a sudden, what is a perennial challenge
Right.
has the ability, if not well managed, to be an even bigger one. So this is a time of uncertainty for them, and cash flow is number one. As I said, that is the perennial challenge of our small businesses. And they would say, if like, in every survey we have done across time, whether sales growth is increasing, receding, the number one issue within cash flow is being paid late. So for all of you who run large businesses that have a supply chain that involves small businesses, the number one thing you can do to help, pay on time. Right, so we in large enterprises are used to stretching our payables. We're like, well, we've got 30, 60, 90 days. Does Google care if I pay like that, bill for ads last month that we ran? They do care, but as a CEO, I might sign that that AP late. But for small business in your supply chain, late payments is really maybe one of the most critical issues they face.
And are you seeing some sort of sense from what you're seeing on the platform that this is really, how does that show up?
Yeah, translate. Well, keep in mind, I think that we would all agree that the last 30 days have been a roller coaster for the global economy, and we don't run XSBI every 30 days. But to give you an indication, which is no surprise, the Small Business Optimism Index from the National Federation of Businesses here in the U.S. Small business optimism peaked in December of 24, and I think within the last month has been on a 5-point decline. And this data point was, I think, from the first week of April. So we'll see what the next indicator tells us. But optimism is declining, and I think with good reason, because as many of you know, they don't know what to prepare for or how to prepare. Now, many of you, if you shop at goods-based businesses, might already be seeing some of the effects, which some of these prices are coming through. Price rises are coming through. I was talking to someone yesterday who told me that a piece of furniture they were thinking about buying, a month ago is now up $200. So I think some of it, they are having no choice but to pass some of that pricing, that cost of goods sold, into their own prices.
And specifically on tariffs and the uncertainty around it, because I think a lot of this, just to translate, kind of thinking through what you're saying, is the kind of the second order, third order effect, right? Like,
absolutely.
Of that uncertainty. But if we think about tariffs specifically, does that impact the way you operate in 180 countries and the rest of it? Does that?
It does and it doesn't. Like, look, we are services-based businesses, so we ourselves are not directly, but our customer is. So as an example, our subscriber growth will slow if new business formations slow. Our subscriber growth it could be affected, or if businesses shut down at a disproportionate rate, of course it could affect our growth. More importantly, we're here every day to help them thrive. So the advice we're giving them right now, which is, again, what you would expect, is we've invested heavily in, we purchased a company called Sift out of South Africa to have leading benchmarking and forecasting tools. So the ability to give them more advanced analytics. This is even before AI, which we'll come to in a moment. Number two, on our platform, big investments in digital payments. So, in many countries around the world, Xero was founded in Australia and New Zealand. Open banking is the thing. It's easier maybe to have real-time payments, or even not real-time, digitally enabled payments. The US is far behind. So investments on our platform in ways to pay and ways to get paid faster, so we can really have them move to real-time digital payment systems, helps them, again, increase their cash flow. So I think we are very attuned, I'd say, to everything in and around forecasting, insights, cash flow, on both pay and getting paid, and getting our customers to attach and adopt digital payments.
Right. And then as you mentioned AI, and I think it's really interesting. I was listening to a session earlier where it made the same points you made, which is actually uncertainty. If you're in a business with AI where it can help you with predictability and help you plan,
intelligence, yes. Planning intelligence is
it's really valuable. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I live in the world of Silicon Valley. Everybody talks about the office of the CFO. And again, to Josh's terms, if you're in a 5-person company, you are the CFO. That office of the CFO tech stack, that sounds very cool when a private equity investor is investing in it. For us, we are the office of the CFO for our customers. So yes, we want to put an enabler in their pocket that gives them everything from intelligence. We'll roll out benchmarking this year with the acquisition of Sift, so they know how they're doing relative to others. And as I said, but really we want actionable insights. So yes, we want to give you more insight, and AI will help power that. But more importantly, we want you to also be able to transact and take action on the platform, so you can solve that cash flow crunch.
So are you putting a lot more capex towards that, or how is this working for you?
Yeah, well, look, I think we say to investors that our 3 big jobs to be done on the platform, and all of them can be powered by AI, are basically accounting, payments, and payroll. And if you think about that, all of our CapEx investment is going into AI, and that's AI to provide advanced analytics, and then to do jobs on your behalf on the platform. So if you're a bookkeeping platform, you can imagine like auto bank rec would make a lot of sense, right? So that's giving our customers back time. Time and money are important. Of the two, for small businesses to survive, they need the money, and then they need back time. So I think almost every investment we're making is time or money back faster, if you think about it in terms of our customer. And for us, it's about putting that office of the CFO inside their pocket, and certainly AI enabling it, and really making that.
And in terms of acquisitions, are you thinking in that space as well, or are you thinking, are there other sectors that you're trying to?
Yeah, so I think the way we think about it is we're very clear that we have what's called a 3x3 strategy. So if it's in the 3 big jobs, accounting, payment, payroll, or our 3 big markets, Australia, UK, and US are our biggest and most strategic markets, then it's in scope for organic or inorganic acceleration. So, we pointed out the acquisition of Sift. Sift is in South Africa, which is one of our markets, and Xero does very well in South Africa. But its leading markets were Australia, the US, and the UK, out of South Africa. They were the second most connected app. They were the second most connected app on our platform. So on Xero, you can connect all of your other apps. You could connect Etsy, or you could connect Sift, or you could connect any one of a number of tools. You can also connect your accountant and bookkeeper. So we knew Sift was a well-recognized and loved platform in our 3 most strategic markets. Just happens to be that the founders are in South Africa. So I'd say that's the landscape on which we focus.
Okay. And let me ask you a slightly more broad question, just about this time in which we are, for you as a business leader. Yes. How are you thinking about this time? And not just the uncertainty which we've kind of touched on, but also just in terms of talent and leadership. What are sort of your key thoughts?
Right. Well, I guess for the world at large, it would be tariffs and AI. And so and so for us, of course, when it comes, and then I'll come to the other things that are very top of mind for me as a leader. When it comes to tariffs, I think enough said. Our job is to help our small businesses navigate that uncertainty. When it comes to AI, we talked about the investment for our customers, but I think every leader right now who's running an enterprise is thinking about the AI investment for themselves. And I think very specifically, to make it tangible for everybody here, mostly I think about how to take my employees on the journey, right? And so I came from a Semaphore CEO lunch, and of course somebody said steer, not fear. And I think right now, as a CEO, your job is actually to steer positively and get your employees to adopt, enable, pilot. And then, I think the fear you're trying to limit, but there's a reality that we all contend with, which is like, gosh, like tomorrow's worker is going to be AI native, an AI agent, or AI enabled. And so my goal is to bring my workforce along on that journey and have them be among the AI enabled, so they can succeed and thrive. And we take our responsibility to our employees as seriously as we do to our customers. So I think mostly what I wake up every day thinking about is, okay, like what's the agenda for my customers, but what's the journey I'm taking my employees on everywhere in the world? And, and they're very different. We're an Australasian founded company. So, the culture and mindset of someone in Australasia will be very different than the most recent Xero who walked in through the door in Silicon Valley, who every day, breeds this stuff to, the UK, where they're, contending with their own issues post-Brexit. So really, it's a very, I would say, global workforce. And so bringing them all on the journey is helping as a CEO, helping them make it simple, make it understandable, and make it achievable. And that's what I think about all day as a leader, is like, how do I translate everything that's going on, all the complexity, and you sort of want to guide your employees in the direction of opportunity while being, incredibly paranoid on the back end. You steer towards optimism, and like inside you just have paranoia all day long. That's a little bit of what it's like.
I was just to wrap up, just because we're running out of time, but I did want to just touch on this, your geographical reach, because there are companies that are many times the size of yours who don't
have that reach.
don't have that reach. And I'm kind of fascinated about the kind of insights that you have, and really just as a business where you're seeing unusual growth, surprising growth, real opportunities where you start to think even beyond those big four, big three?
Big three, we're in 7 markets directly, and as I said, 180 indirectly. I mean, right now on the platform, I would say kind of from a macro perspective, we're not seeing anything that I'd say is COVID-like. We ourselves are preparing, for just our SMBs going through probably prolonged uncertainty. But I don't think we're seeing any shifts and shocks, in the system yet. I think mostly, again, we feel like our job is to equip our SMBs first and foremost with all the tools that a much larger business would have as soon as possible. And when we think about what governments can do to support, it comes back into that same game plan of, we see in the UK late payment legislation, e-invoicing, you see e-invoicing mandates. We exist in a number of Commonwealth countries that are, I'd say, more SMB regulatory focused than the US, and so that's one of the things we see around the world. So I do think there's some things in one market to learn from the other. The UK, as an example, has really been, I'd say, pro-small business in terms of needing and trying to help them thrive with both e-invoicing and late payments on the agenda of new governments. So I think that's something that we see that we think could translate and help SMBs get a leg up. I'm not sure it's going to happen in the US, but certainly globally we see many markets advance in these areas.
Sakina, thank you very much for your time. We've run out of time, but really appreciate you talking us through this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Bernard Liato, CEO of Balderton, Everett Taylor, CEO of Kickstarter, and Andrew Edgecliffe Johnson, CEO editor at Semaphore.
Everybody, particular thanks to Everett and Bernard for being with us today. Our topic is starting capital for startups, and our two guests here come at this from quite different perspectives, but I think that's going to be rather valuable. So just to give you a very brief introduction, Balderton, and you can correct me if I get any of this wrong, you're focused on tech ventures in Europe, largely, making early stage and growth investments with about 9 billion under management. And some of your greatest hits include Revolut, others in fintech, cyber, gaming, a very wide span of industries. Kickstarter is a fabulous crowdfunding platform. Everett, incidentally, if you didn't read the CEO signal this morning, features in my newsletter and online on Semaphore this morning, after a great interview we had not long ago in New York. Cumulatively, you've now raised $8.7 billion, 100 million pledges for 277,000 projects. Among those are Aura, who are here with us at the World Economy Summit, Peloton, Allbirds, Oculus Rift, etc. So I think that gives you a bit of a sense of the two different perspectives here. But I'm going to cruelly ask you to tell the audience why your model is better than the other guy's model. I'm going to start with you, Everett. What's the advantage of the Kickstarter model for startups?
Well, thank you everybody for being here today. I really appreciate your time. I think the advantage of Kickstarter, I wouldn't say that it's better, it's just different. And I think one of the advantages of a Kickstarter is the ability to not dilute yourself as a founder or CEO. Kickstarter is reward-based crowdfunding, so you don't give any of your equity away when building your company. We've all heard horror stories from founders who lose their companies due to getting big percentages of their company being taken away. And so we kind of keep founders safe in that sense, that they can build a company, get capital for their business, be able to release products without having to dilute themselves. I think the other advantage of Kickstarter is that there's a ready-made audience on the platform. Oftentimes 60, 70, 80% of the funding comes from organically on the platform for a lot of our creators.
These just regular.
These are people that are just who want to support new products and things on the platform. And even at the bare minimum, we're seeing 25, 30%. So that's still a lot of great organic traffic that is coming to your platform of people that may not know what you're doing. And so that is very, very helpful. It also gives you a central place to really galvanize and cultivate your audience as well. During a time with social media algorithms becoming more difficult, people are clicking on emails less. I tell people that Kickstarter is the place where your core audience, that's where your core audience is. And a lot of the creators and entrepreneurs using our platform are continuing to release products over time. We were talking about Peak Design recently, who just dropped a new product. That company's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They just dropped a new product where they sold $13 million worth of inventory, right? So people are continuing to use that platform over time instead of just a one-off.
Right. Okay. So not better, just different. Yeah. Balderton's model, what's the advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think our model is very complementary to the Kickstarter model. I mean, we love when companies are kickstarted. We actually are after, and then we're going to enable them to grow throughout the entire journey. We do from seed to IPO. We have the growth stage, so we'll do a seed Series A, then Series B, Series C during the growth phase. So we'll be there for the long duration. The reality also, I think Kickstarter, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but applies more to certain products, probably more to physical products maybe than to digital products. We do a lot more digital services and actual physical products.
Right. So what's, from the two different perspectives you have, what is the kind of current health of the funding ecosystem for startups? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I would say in Europe, I think the fundamentals are very good right now, and they've completely changed compared to where they were 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, there was only like 40 billion of VC investment in European startups. Today, it's 10x, so 430 billion. We have multiplied the number of unicorns. We have 360, we had about 30 or 40 10 years ago. So I think in general, the momentum around the tech ecosystem is terrific, and we see a lot of really exciting, high-quality projects. So as long as a venture firm, as long as you have a fund that you've managed to raise, which we did last year, we raised about 1.3 billion. We have now 2 to 3 years to invest, so we're feeling very good shape.
So you've got a choice about when to put that money to work. Is this the right moment, or is it too uncertain?
No, I think it's the right moment. I mean, we're not too dependent on a particular moment in time, because our companies are going to develop over a period of 10 to 15 years. So we play on long cycles. We're usually, our success is based on disruption that will actually go through cycles. It's not really based on an economic cycle.
Okay. So Everett, remind us what the rough geographic split is, first of all, of the activity, the funding activity on Kickstarter.
Yeah, I mean, U.S. is our largest market. Well, it depends on how you're looking at it, because we have two sides of the marketplace. We have the creators that are launching, and that's all over the world, and obviously the people that are backing, that's all over the world. But the markets that stand out the most for us is U.S., U.K., and actually China.
Right.
Are the three biggest markets for us.
Okay. And so what does the kind of appetite look like right now in those major markets for funding projects?
I mean, it's growing rapidly. I mean, when you look at the U.S., for example, when there's tough macroeconomic times, people tend to get a lot more creative. Also, the world is changing, especially with the new generation. You know, they're not growing up saying, I want to work a 9 to 5. They want to be creators. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to do something different. They don't aspire always to be doctors and lawyers like, kids did before. They are aspiring to be independent. And with the advances in technology, it's more advantageous than ever. And so we're seeing more people launch on Kickstarter. We just got a note from my head of China who said, like, the mark used to be like million was like considered a successful campaign. Now campaigns in China are saying 5 million USD is a success because people are raising more money, people are being more successful, people are opting to build careers within the creator economy like never before, and Kickstarter is really at the center of all that. The other thing that I would say is that just all the infrastructure from music to film, et cetera, when it becomes more challenging, Kickstarter becomes, it benefits Kickstarter. When VC money and when people aren't putting out VC dollars, especially for physical products, which tend to be a little bit harder, Kickstarter becomes the kind of go-to place for that.
It's sort of, you've clearly, it seems to me that you've kind of repositioned Kickstarter or clarified its focus around this creator economy. Obviously, you're still working with a lot of projects which are, great physical products in the end, like an Ur or whatever. But is this creator economy widening how we should think about the definition of startups?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, you just see it within the education system. Like, I'm about to give the commencement speech at VCU, and I went and visited some of the students, and the things that they were talking about, like they're all having different types of majors, but they're all talking about being creators. They're all talking about building businesses and building brands. And so I think Kickstarter, it's important for Kickstarter to really embrace that, because I think that space is widening, and also they need the tools to be successful. And that's why when I came into Kickstarter, I was like, I want us to be more than a crowdfunding platform. I want us to be a true power player in the creator economy. And so we've built tools not only just for crowdfunding, but before you launch a business, and now after you launch a product, post-campaign tools, fulfillment tools, et cetera. So we want to be that kind of all-in-one place for creators when they're launching new products and new businesses.
To that point about not just creating a flow of capital, but actually adding something to that. What are the, Balderton's not just bringing money to the table when you invest in a startup. What do you find is actually most valuable of what you bring? You're bringing the expertise of the team, but what else are you bringing? Is it tools? Is it?
Well, there's a few things. I think first, of course, we need to help them grow to become a global leader. And when you start in Paris or Berlin, it's not necessarily easy to figure out how am I going to attack the international markets. Should I, if I start in Paris, should I go to Germany after, or the UK, or should I go to the US? If I go to the US, it's a different way of doing business. And we have had the chance to be on the side of companies that have done that expansion. And so we can help them recruit the right people, put in place the right model from a legal standpoint, from a organization design standpoint, and so on and so forth. So we do that, of course. The other thing is one thing that is particular to Balderton, which is we have recognized over the few decades that we've been in operation that the journey of an entrepreneur is a very difficult one, is a hard one, and about half of the entrepreneurs end up doing a burnout. And if they do a burnout, a full one, because it's too much pressure, they have to work really, really hard. And I think the concept so far has been, well, if you want to succeed, if you want to be a great entrepreneur, you need to work 24/7. And the reality is you can't, right? And if you think, the way we think about entrepreneurs is the same way we've been thinking about professional athletes. And if you think of professional athlete, you don't say you have to play or compete all day, all night. You have to sleep well, you have to feed yourself well, you have to have good mental health, so you have to have coaching and all this. So we've built basically a well-being and performance program for founders, where we have a group of doctors around them who work on their fitness, on their sleep, on their nutrition. We have leadership development. We have peer support through CEO forums, and so and we have this whole ecosystem that we build, and the entrepreneurs love it because suddenly they feel that they have an actual support system around them.
That's fascinating. It also reminds me of the conversation we had about the very unusual working arrangements you have at Kickstarter. Can you just share the details of those, Everett?
They are evolving. So Kickstarter is the only major tech company with a wall-to-wall union. So our company unionized in 2020 before I was there. I didn't screw that one up. And then also we have a 4-day work week also before my time. And so we have a very unique way in which we work. We're also fully remote. We just sold our office. And so we have a fully remote team all across the US, Canada, China, Europe, et cetera, et cetera.
And is that 4-day week sort of helping avoid burnout in your own team?
I think it's really dependent on the person and how they manage their time. I think actually a 4-day work week, if you don't manage it well, can burn you out even more because you're trying to fit so much more in a condensed week,
right?
Where you need that Friday or that 5th day because it's so exhausting. I work 7 days a week. I can't really tell the difference, but I think it just really depends on the person.
So let's get back to the capital side of this. Bernard, you led the first European tech IPO on NASDAQ back in 1994. I think there's been anxiety in Europe every year since then that it's not Silicon Valley, that the sort of funding ecosystem for startups is somehow falling behind or has fallen behind the US. Do European entrepreneurs still dream of landing that first big Silicon Valley investor as their mark of having made it?
Well, it's changing. I think it's still very much a mark of success. But the model is evolving. I think initially the model was you start in Europe, you get maybe initial seed capital from a European investor, and then quite rapidly you want to get US money, you want to start US operations. Probably you're going to have to move your headquarters to the US because then you will be, at the end of the journey, you'll go public in the US or you'll be acquired by a US large corporation. That model is changing now because we've seen a few European companies managing to be global leaders out of Europe. So the Spotify, the Adyen, SML, and these kind of businesses. Revolut is in this case as well. And so we're starting to see the model changing, where now you start in Europe, you're going to expand internationally. US is going to be one, but instead of moving and building your management team in the US, you're going to stay in Europe, you're going to attract maybe Americans or others to build your team in Europe, and you're going to continue to develop your capital infrastructure with global money, but Europe will be a very important part of it because now Europe has growth funds and has scale capital. And then the great news about this is that the spin-offs that come out of your company, because they always spin-off coming of successful companies, will be in Europe. So now we're starting to create a virtuous circle where the money and the talent will get reinvested in the same place.
We're in Washington. Yeah, I should ask a policy question. What have the two of you learned startups need from governments to make entrepreneurs into success stories?
I mean, in my view, what I'm saying to the governments in Europe is like, stay out of the way. So we don't need a lot from you. We need less regulation, harmony between the regulation that you're putting together across the 27 countries in Europe. But we don't need capital from the government. In defense, we need contracts, right? And we need more to evangelize a concept that it's okay to buy from small companies. But that's probably it.
And by the way, you are investing in defense now.
We do invest in defense, and what will make defense startups successful is if, again, the military in the various countries in Europe are ready to buy from them.
Everett, do you need anything? Do your creators need anything to spur that entrepreneurial ecosystem from government?
Yeah, I think it's just an open ear and empathy. I think sometimes you can't forget what it's like to be someone that's, you're not in their shoes. And I think that these entrepreneurs really just need a way to just make their dreams come true and not have too much involvement. I mean, we're seeing the impact on our business just from what's going on with tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that lacks some empathy, especially for so many small business owners and the margins that they have. And so I think we just need an open ear and empathy from government.
So both of you are in the flow of entrepreneurial talent. You're meeting a lot of entrepreneurs every day. Do you see something different in the next generation of entrepreneurs?
I guess I could say, yeah, I guess I could say it. I think the thing that I see from this next generation is that, I think they're trying to be leaner than the generations before. I hear a lot of new entrepreneurs that are speaking about building billion-dollar companies, utilizing AI and having less than 50 employees or less than 100 employees. And before it was like, how many employees can we get and how much capital can we raise? And, we want to raise $200 million or whatever. And I hear more and more entrepreneurs wanting to be smarter with the capital that they're raising, have more ownership in their companies, and continue to be a lot more lean.
Do you see a generational shift?
I think I see two things. One is that in Europe specifically, the entrepreneurs are more ambitious than the prior generation, so they want to build more, bigger, more global companies. But I think something that maybe is European is they want to build good companies, responsible companies that have good values, and that remains, and that are planet sensible. So I think we see a lot of that.
Yeah. Final question: what's the coolest startup you've each seen recently?
Wow, coolest startup I've seen recently.
We're working with a company called the Exploration Company, which is a space tech business trying to build a European SpaceX, led by a wonderful woman. She's building a capsule now, and then she's going to move to the launcher. There's lots of incredible tech that she's built.
You get a ticket to ride if you invest.
Well, for now, no human in the capsule, so I won't go there. Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of what's the coolest thing I've seen, because I get to see so many cool things. I won't say a particular product, but I do like the number of like robotics and AI that we're seeing on the platform of like people just having very creative uses. I mean, we even had someone create a whole album with AI robots, so that's been really, really interesting to watch on the platform.
All right. We'll be back next year with the AI robots, and hopefully Bernard and Everett as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please welcome Matthew Prince, CEO of Cloudflare, Roger Ferguson, CIO at Red Cell Partners, and Morgan Chalfant, Deputy Washington Editor at Semaphore.
Matthew, Roger, thank you so much for being here. I want to first start out with the hot topic in the news these days, which is tariffs. Roger, I'll go to you first. Wondering what you think the Trump administration's tariffs mean for the climate for startups today.
All right, so when we think about tariffs and the climate today, I think we should talk about three separate things. One is the process, the on, the off, et cetera, which is creating quite a bit of volatility. I think that has put a little bit of a damper on startups and others, in part because many people were thinking that there would be a number of exits that might emerge, new liquidity could come back into the sector, and that really hasn't happened. So that's process. Then the tariffs themselves, he's already put a 10% base tariff on everything, plus a much higher tariffs on Chinese imports. That has already started to weigh on a number of sectors already. People don't recognize it, but already the amount of money that's being collected or the amount of tariffs is higher than it's been since the early 1900s. And so that's affecting society overall, raising costs very quietly, but across a number of industries. And then there's the future prospect of even higher tariffs. So net, I'd say created greater uncertainty, slowed and created volatility, and in some sectors starting to increase cost. And all three of those things, I think, are a little bit of a problem for startups and smaller industry companies, smaller companies.
Matthew, can I get your thoughts on that? And I mean, if the tariffs go away tomorrow, does that erase the challenge facing startups?
Well, I think there's really just an enormous amount of uncertainty, which is in the world right now. And so
I think the challenge is when you have uncertainty as an investor, as a startup, it's harder to make the investments if you don't know if the foundation that you're building on is actually going to be stable. So I think that if the tariffs go away tomorrow, but then there's a prospect they're going to come back the next day, that uncertainty is the real challenge. I think stability and predictability is what you really need in an investing environment. It's really what you need if you're going to be building and investing in a new company.
Mm-hmm. And does the administration's deregulatory agenda balance things out at all? I mean, what does that do for startups or companies more broadly?
I mean, again, I think it's going to depend on a company by company basis whether you were particularly subject to regulation or not subject to regulation. What I think is I don't know that we know what the administration's agenda is long term. We right now just have a bunch of action and then revoking that action and different things coming. What I would hope is that there is some level of stability. There's some place that we get to where the news every day isn't that the plan has changed. And if we get to that, I think that's better for any kind of startup investment.
Mm-hmm. Roger, I wanted to bring in AI here. Obviously, that's something that we're all talking about in Washington and beyond. How does AI change the game for startups?
Well, let me answer that question sort of in the context of the company where I'm the CIO. My company is called Red Cell Partners, and we are an incubator of startup companies, many of them driven by AI, so I see it through that light. And I think the answer is AI can be quite a game changer for a large number of companies. Some of them are AI companies, some of them will use AI as input. But very importantly, one should think about this not as those very large, highly expensive large language models, which all of us talk about and use, from Gemini and others. But it's really the focus of that kind of analytical capability on smaller sectors, industry-specific, company-specific. And I think it can actually be for many small and medium-sized companies and startups, such as ones that we do at Red Cell, a real game changer. It can define what your company is and make your company differentiated from many others in the marketplace.
Are there any companies you feel like are taking advantage of AI in a way that's sort of setting them apart?
Well, again, I can speak to the companies that we at Red Cell have started. So we've got one that's called DEFCON AI, and it is doing what's called contested logistics for the Department of Defense. And I think it's really, setting itself apart from others. And there'll be a number also in healthcare as well that we are doing. So Zephyr AI is another one. So there are a number of companies that I know personally that I think are using AI in a way that differentiates them from others.
What do you think, Matthew? What do you see as the opportunities for AI and the businesses more broadly?
I think there are the obvious things, which are, we use AI internally now to help our customer support team be more effective. We've hired fewer people on customer support, but they do a better job in that. We use it in our finance team to be able to predict when like a customer is going to pay late or when churn might happen or when someone might be ready to upgrade. And I think everyone is going to find those sorts of areas. The place where I think there's the biggest risk and maybe the biggest opportunity is that AI is going to change the user interface of the internet and the web and how we've all experienced it. To date, the business model of the web, what's sat behind it, really is based on search. You search for something, you go there, and then when you're there, whether it's Semaphore or any publisher or an application that's out there, you're able to then derive value from that, whether it's monetary value by selling subscriptions or posting ads, or just ego, right? You know that someone is reading these things. That is changing. We've already seen that change in relatively mild ways. And the best stat of this is 10 years ago, for every visitor that Google would send to you, they would crawl 2 pages. So the ratio was 2 pages crawled to 1 visitor. Today, the crawl rate has stayed exactly the same, but it's now 6 to 1. So what's changed? The change is that Google now answers 75% of the queries that they get without you having to leave Google. So you don't have to go to those 10 blue links and click to the original source. You're getting the answer directly on Google, and that's made it much harder for any original content creators that are monetizing through subscriptions or ads or anything like that. That's the good news. You look at OpenAI, the ratio is 250 to 1. If you look at Anthropic, it's 6,000 to 1. And so if original content creators are struggling at 6 to 1, I think there has to be a new business model that exists for those original content creators if we're going to be in a world where more and more questions are getting answered without you having to go to the original source. And I think that that is incredibly terrifying to a lot of the publishing industry today. But I actually think there's an opportunity to create sort of this new wave of value that original content creators are out there creating. I live in Park City, Utah. It matters to me enormously whether it snows more on the east side of the mountain or the west side of the mountain. And so I subscribe to a weather forecaster who will give me that precise data. If that's coming to AI, then that forecaster can now start to actually sell that data to the various AI models so that I can then ask it, where should I go skiing this morning? And it would tell me one side of the mountain versus the other. So I think that they can actually be a reemergence of this niche technology, this niche content creation. But we need something which is a different model than search. And I think that's both the most terrifying thing that's going on in AI right now and also maybe the most exciting opportunity.
So what might that different model look like then?
Pay for crawl. Like you literally, as the AI companies crawl, you can do it. My sort of utopian vision for the future is humans should get back to getting content for free and robots should pay a ton for it.
Interesting. You mentioned risks. Are there other risks that you see associated with AI?
I think there's going to be, and we should all just prepare ourselves, there's going to be a huge sort of wave of horrible headlines over the course of the next 24 months. Families that lose their life savings because it sounded like their daughter called them from a Mexican prison and said, you need to wire $1 million or I'm not getting out. The number of, like my elderly parents who get tricked into revealing some secret because someone who sounded like they were from their bank called up and knew a lot about them. AI is going to make that the scammers' jobs easier. And again, I think that those are going to be horrible, horrible headlines. And it does create some risk that anywhere that we have relied on someone sounding a certain way or looking a certain way in order to prove their identity, that's going to break down. But I think the good news is that at the end of the day, again, we are in the cybersecurity space. My job at some level is to scare you into buying our products. But I think that that's actually, those headlines are going to be the exception, not the rule. I think over time, AI actually is going to make the web, make the internet more secure. And we see that every day. Our machine learning systems, we wouldn't have the arrogance to call them AI, but our machine learning systems take the feed of data of all of the traffic that flows through Cloudflare's network and are now surfacing new cyber attacks as threats that no human has ever identified before. And that ability for us to use an enormous amount of data, process it incredibly quickly, and actually turn that around and make the internet more secure as a result, I think is again, it's going to sound really scary in the short term, but over the long term, I think we're actually going to have a much more secure internet.
Roger, I wanted to talk about, ask you about AI regulation because it's something that we hear a lot about on Capitol Hill. Obviously, the Biden administration and the Trump administration have both tried their own executive actions on AI. You used to be a regulator at the Fed, which is a different position than you hold now. When you see lawmakers, policymakers think about AI regulation, what should they be thinking about in terms of the do's and don'ts of good AI regulation?
Right, so again, speaking from a history of being a different kind of regulator in financial services, a couple of do's and don'ts, as I see it. First, don't rush. These things are changing pretty quickly. Hard to know exactly what you're regulating, and certainly you don't know why you're regulating necessarily. So one of the don'ts is don't just jump in head first to it. Secondly, don't do it without talking to and consulting the industry. Consulting is not the same thing as necessarily doing exactly what they ask, but what I learned at the Federal Reserve and other places is you've got to go and talk to the experts about what's going on, how it's working, what are they thinking, et cetera. And so don't do it without bringing the industry in for consultation. Flip side of all of that, listen to a bunch of experts. Talk to people like Matthew, talk to others, exactly what are the risks that we need to worry about and what are the risks that are maybe sort of made up and more hyper. And also I'd say one of the do's is learn from history. We know a lot about different kinds of regulations in financial services or in transportation, et cetera. And think about what has worked in the past and what are you worried about. And particularly when it comes to AI, it's going to be very, very hard to regulate knowledge. It's going to be hard to regulate models per se. Where you might be able to regulate is the interface between the model and the human being, because what you're trying to avoid is harm and damage being done. And that's the kind of thing that Matthew and others are talking about. And so, how do you think about that kind of regulation where you're trying to avoid a specific harm and drive that? And the final thing I'd say in AI is the major players, the major producers, are very interested in having this be perceived as being very successful. And so the possibility of public-private partnerships really exists. I think of this as sort of the very, very beginning of electricity. When electricity was first being popularized with Westinghouse and Tesla and others, the last thing they wanted was bad headlines of the type that you just heard about. They didn't want houses burning down because of electricity. And so the thought process had to be, how do we make this new thing safe so that we can expand the use of it? And so recognizing as a do that the industry has the same general goals and objectives as regulators, which is to create a very safe, secure model. Whenever you have new technology coming in, those that are driving it want adoption. And in order to get adoption, what they want is a set of rules that make it safe to work with. And so those are some of the do's and don'ts that I've learned.
I want to drill down on one thing you mentioned, just the need to not rush. But when the technology is moving so fast, I guess what's the balance there? Is there a risk of policymakers acting or moving too slowly so it becomes obsolete?
Look, there's always a risk of moving too slowly. I don't think that risk is massive here because this is going to be with us for a long period of time, right? So I think of this a little bit. I just use one analogy, electricity. The other analogy is automobiles, right? It took us a little while to figure out here in the U.S., drive on one side, not on the other, how stoplights work, what happens at an intersection. Frankly, you had to learn all of that by watching how these machines were working when they weren't regulated. And so, I think being attuned to what are the real risks and then figure out how to respond to that. But throwing a regulation in right now that could end up, particularly given the geopolitical context, slowing down developments here in the U.S., I think is also something to worry about. So there are risks on going too fast, risks on going too slow. And most importantly, I think there's a risk on over-regulating before we know exactly what the dangers are that we have to worry about.
Matthew, I want to give you a chance to weigh in here. What do you see as the federal government's role in AI regulation?
So the challenge here is that this technology behaves in the opposite way of every other technology that we've ever thought. Most of the time as technology advances, it becomes more predictable, right? So as we get better at making steel, then we know exactly how much a certain grade of steel can hold up a building. As we get better at writing computer programs, we know that when you push the button, the screen turns blue. And every time you push the button, the screen is going to turn blue. And if you push the button, the screen doesn't turn blue, then there's a bug. AI is different. AI is by its very design, designed to be non-deterministic, where you want to be able to put information in and then something comes out. And that's what's been so amazing to all of us as we have experimented with these tools, where you put something in and it almost feels like it is being creative. It may actually almost be being creative. And what that means is that it is very, very difficult to regulate outputs. It is very difficult to say, make sure your AI never does X. And what's been interesting is for quite some time, and I think there's been a change in policymaking in China over the course of the last 6 months, but for a very long period of time, even though China had all the investment, even though China had all the technology, even though they were working in this area, they actually were way behind in AI because if you're at Google and you make an AI and Kevin Roose from the New York Times gets it to act like a Nazi, which is basically Kevin's job, that's very embarrassing to Google, but nobody goes to jail. If you're Baidu and your new AI, suddenly you ask it to pretend to be, what was it like to be a student protester in Tiananmen Square in 1989? That was just completely verboten. In the last 6 months, China's policy has changed to actually relax the amount of regulation on outputs, and as a result, you see DeepSeek, you see what Baidu is doing, you see that change. And I think that that's a good lesson for policymakers here. What held China back was the fear that these non-deterministic systems would act non-deterministically. As soon as they relaxed those regulations, you saw a just bloom in the amount of AI innovation that was coming out. And I think that is a warning sign to regulators in the US and Europe that if we crack down too much on saying this unpredictable machine you have to make predictable, that's going to hold back what is going on in AI. And so we have to think about what are the actual results. And when you push people, when you push the AI doomers out there on like what are they really worried about, you push them and push them, there really is one area that they're specifically worried about, which is actually pathogen design or some sort of chemical design that could be used. And so I think let's focus on where the real challenges are. Let's focus on where the real problems are. Let's figure out how to constrain those. But mostly, let's try to make sure that we don't take a thing where you can't predict what the outputs are and then force companies to make an unpredictable system predictable.
I'm glad you mentioned China because I did want to ask you, from your vantage point, do you think the U.S. it risks losing its edge compared to China on AI?
6 months ago, I would have said that the fact that China was regulating outputs was always going to put them at a disadvantage. And something feels like it has changed, and the actual policies have changed there. And there is innovation now in the AI space, which has just rapidly accelerated there. And I think that we should, again, be cognizant that it was a policy change that was holding China back. As they have relaxed that policy change, I think that has allowed them to go forward. But I think they will always be at somewhat of a disadvantage because of the fact that they won't tolerate these AI systems being unpredictable. They won't tolerate them criticizing the government. They won't tolerate them doing other things. That's always going to make it much more difficult to have real innovation over the long term.
Can I get your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd agree with that last point. I think part of the challenge vis-a-vis any totalitarian society is just the point that Matthew made. They're worried about the outputs. And as soon as you constrain the outputs, what you're doing in some sense is constraining the creativity of the individual standing behind it, creating fear, anxiety, et cetera. A place where I think the issue might be closer is just the amount of data that different countries have, particularly like China. Think about facial recognition as a prime example. And also think about their willingness perhaps to violate things like copyright and just gather up much more data. And so I think that's a challenge. Where I think we here in the US, I hope, are still in a good position is we have, out of all of the leading AI scientists, the vast majority of them currently are in the US. Here I emphasize the word currently because there's nothing that stops people from moving. And so the question of who wins, so to speak, if that's the right way to think about it, depends very much on the point that Matthew made and that you raised earlier. It's how society recognizes and works with these new technologies to make them both safe, but also to give people a chance to experiment with them. And the societal context, I think, is one which overall, I believe the US will be in a better position because we are more willing to allow the kind of experimentation that Matthew talked about, and because I believe our policymakers actually do listen to things like this when you say, well, how much should you regulate? His lesson, my lesson, regulate carefully, regulate slowly. Those kinds of things, I think, resonate more with our policymakers than perhaps they do in China.
Roger, Matthew, thank you so much. We're out of time. It's a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Chris Novak, Managing Director of Verizon Cybersecurity, and Konstantin Richter, CEO of Blockdaemon, and Gina Chua, Executive Editor at Semaphore.
Well, I was a little worried because we're talking about risks here to blockchain, to crypto, to DeFi, and I thought it'd be not a great thing to come in and be sort of a downer. But then I saw I saw all the slides up there, and so like we're perfectly on point here. I guess I just sort of start by saying, crypto, I guess, whatever the right term is sort of having a moment. It's becoming much more mainstream. There's a statistic that 28% of American adults now have some crypto holdings. So we're here really to talk about sort of what are the risks to that and how do we mitigate those risks. And I think leaving aside just the issue of the blockchain technology itself, which I think we know creates an immutable record and has essentially sort of security built into its architecture. But there are other places where it's vulnerable, and even that architecture has some questions, as I think we're going to raise. But let me start with you, Chris, because you've obviously looked at security broadly across all sorts of industries, and some of them are certainly not unique to blockchain and to DeFi. Can you talk through where we stand just in terms of security risks, not just in America but around the world?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a tremendous challenge. In fact, obviously, we just released our 2025 Data Breach Investigations Report, and you saw a lot of the stats there pop up on the screen as we walked out. And I think one of the interesting things was just the doubling, for example, of third-party risk from 15% to 30%. The fact that most organizations today rely on probably not just one, but maybe a dozen, or depending on the size of the organization, maybe even hundreds of third parties. If you add in things like their suppliers and vendors, becomes a much more complex ecosystem. And what we find is that introduces another level of risk that a lot of organizations just haven't fully cared for. And this is obviously a global problem because even if you're a largely, say, US-centric organization, there's a really good chance that your partners, suppliers, or vendors may be elsewhere, which may mean access to your systems are happening from elsewhere or access to your data is happening elsewhere.
Konstantin, and in the DeFi world, in the crypto world, the payouts are just so much bigger, which makes the risks so much higher. And could you talk a little bit about the different kinds of risks that you're seeing as people try to access those wallets or those systems?
Yeah, for sure. First off, maybe as a primer, and you've mentioned it, what's interesting is that crypto is an acceptable word again. I remember the last 4 years we were always digital assets, and obviously now we're back at crypto, which is great. I think the Blockdaemon runs is the largest infrastructure operator in crypto, and we also have technology for wallets. We sell technology to 70% of the largest institutions in the world. And so we see a lot of this. And crypto, obviously, when you talk about risk for security, there's different components, right? So a big one, actually, interestingly enough, in the crypto world, we're very used to risk in the sense of people try to steal from us all the time. Because, if you hack a wallet and there's digital assets in there, you can send them somewhere, and great, off you are. And so I think crypto companies, luckily, we're very stress tested for sort of software ransomware type of attacks. Those are normally angles that we can prepare ourselves for. The angles that are much harder are the ones where it's actually not an AI, but a physical person. And so we were referring to earlier, like one of the problems we see is that engineers will apply for jobs, and there might be North Korean sleeper agents, and they're in your company for 2-3 years, and ultimately build something in your systems that then gets exploited, which was Bybit, for example. Looks like that's what happened there, which is a $1.5 billion drain on a wallet, and that's a good heist, And so the incentives for a long-term strategy here are very high, and it's very hard to, in a remote world where open source software gets developed by communities of people, to kind of filter out the, who are really the people that are building code for good and who are the ones that are more tricky. And the same is true for like personal safety. Obviously, the other one is the easiest part is you just snag someone. you think looks like a crypto guy, and clobber them until they give you their ledger or whatever code it is you think they might.
The easiest way to crack a password is with a hammer to somebody's head.
Yeah, and it's interesting because for most of specifically the cold wallets, there aren't transfer limits, right? Like when you go to an ATM, there's like, oh, you can get $2,000 every time or something. You can only clobber someone that often. But with a crypto wallet, it can be $100 million, right? And so it's very worth it. And so it's even more important than ever to be anonymous, and which is also part of the spirit of crypto. And so most people, I think, that I know that are important in crypto, you will never have heard of because they try to keep a very low profile. And so that's an important part of security as well, is like we don't talk about really what we do and who we are and who we service. We try to have as little profile as possible publicly.
But let me just come back to that North Korean sleeper agent, which is a real thing. That is not, in some sense, a traditional cybersecurity issue. I mean, I'm not sure, Chris, if you have a solution to that, but how do you deal with issues like that? How do you know someone is somebody, and and is that really part of certainly your business, or how do you help companies deal with those sorts of things?
So, I mean, we've seen a lot of those circumstances. I was sharing an example with you earlier that the first time we saw one of those come up was a couple of years ago, and the people who had encountered that sleeper agent kind of situation, they called in and said, hey, we need help investigating something, but I don't even know how to describe it. It seems like we hired someone, but we're not sure who they are. And then as we got to the crux of it, we figured out what had happened. But ultimately, obviously, it comes down to how robust you do things like background checks, but then also people can get past that. There's fraudulent identities, stolen identities. So then the next thing that we're typically looking at is you're looking at user behavior. You're looking to see, is the person accessing your environment from where you expect them to? In this case, if they're coming from somewhere that's a sanctioned country, generally that's going to set off alarm bells in your systems. They may be wise and try to circumvent that. We work with a lot of organizations to help assess what are their security controls to see if they're robust enough to be able to capture that, as well as also things like managed services to say, look, if they don't have the skill set, the resources, or the technology in-house, then how do we help them augment what they have so they get that level of visibility so they can be comfortable that they're operating in a more secure manner?
And Constantine, how did you deal with those situations?
I mean, in our case, luckily, we're pretty well trained to identify those things. And so we're able to, we had a North Korean asset apply for a job once, and we found out, and they were based in South Korea, and so it's not like, it wasn't that obvious. It took us a minute. And we found out later that the person didn't make it through our interview process, but worked for another company and got outed, basically. And so that can happen. And actually, quite frankly, similarly, and just to give it a more, I don't know if it's a fun thing, but honeypotting also starts to happen a lot with apps like Telegram and WhatsApp and stuff, where individuals will be, and unfortunately mostly men, because men tend to be very susceptible to this thing, where somebody's like, hey, I read your profile, you sound really smart, can we talk? And people start building these relationships online. And there was actually a great economist series called Scamming that talks about that phenomena. And so I think those kind of things are also going to be really, really interesting. And so you really have to train your staff about, like, when something's too good to be true, it probably is. Like, really be careful who you share information with, any information, really. And so the other thing is that we see all the time is that people will get phone calls or text messages that look like they're from me, asking them to do things, like wire things somewhere, or and so but they're getting very sophisticated. So early on, it was just a text message from a different number, right? Which is like, okay, well, easy, right? But on the messaging apps, it looks like it's my Telegram account, for example, messaging you, telling you to do something, and then it gets a little more, is this real or not? And then the next thing is that now they have AI voice agents, so you get all these robocalls all the time, and so they can actually give you a call and it'll sound like I'm talking. And so then it gets really hard. And so I don't even know where this ends, quite frankly. I'm not even sure about Chris here. No, but like,
I'm real.
Yeah, but it's an interesting conundrum that you just have to continue to train your staff at, right? And really remind people that identity theft is going to be really, really easy, and it's getting more and more sophisticated.
I mean, the good news is at Semaphore, all we get is people asking us to buy gift cards for Justin Smith. So
Yeah,
the risk is fairly low there.
and I'll add another twist to that too that we've seen. So there's the element of the sleeper agents getting a job with your organization, but the other twist that we also see on that is they will pretend to be with an organization and they will try to lure your employees and say, look, I've got a great job, I think you're a perfect fit for it. They'll kind of know what the average salary is and they'll say, look, I'll add another $100,000 to that, so it becomes really attractive to luring some of your people away. And whether they get the job or not, usually what they're trying to do is get information out of the interview process. So tell me, how familiar are you with this kind of technology? How do you do security? Give me an example. Give me a use case of something you've done. A lot of people very excited to show off their skills will reveal more information than they should, which may be all the threat actor actually needs.
Let me pivot away from, I mean, this is the stuff of movies, and I'm sure there'll be a good TV series. Let me just pivot away to slightly, I'm not sure it's esoteric, but more infrastructure-based. So constantly we're talking about sort of what the structural risks are to DeFi in terms of, how much concentration of power there might be, where the nodes sit, and so on. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. There's this inherent conundrum with crypto, which is basically there's a degree of cyber anarchism involved in the structure of these networks. So ideally, no participant in the network is supposed to be more powerful than the other, right? And so the whole authenticity and functionality of these networks lives by no individual having the control or group of people being able to turn a network off or change the rules without a really complex process. And so what happens now is one is when that changes and voting rights get implicated in open source systems, then that can be really, really tricky. That actually is more a risk now that when more institutions come into the market, actually in the Bitcoin community, I don't know if you guys have heard that SoftBank, who's a great backer of ours, and Cantor and Tether are setting up a $3 billion Bitcoin fund. I think it was announced 1 or 2 days ago. And actually, interestingly enough, in the Bitcoin industry, stuff like that concerns people because they're like, hey, they're going to centralize. The more larger institutions own more and more of the stack. MicroStrategy is another good example. I think they own we're like at what, 10% or something, like a significant amount of Bitcoin, where that becomes a possible, attack vector to the network, right? And so the open source cryptographically secured networks basically function via the tokenomics, and there is always the short-term risk to what happens to these tokens and what does it do to the long-term viability of these networks. And so what we need is regulation so that people in the US can legally do this, run infrastructure, run nodes here in the US so they don't go offshore. That's one starting point. So we need to even start with bringing the infrastructure back to the US. And so that was a big flight the last couple of years, even in our business. Most people who asked us to run infrastructure or nodes wanted it to be done outside of the US. And so you want to make sure that that comes back in here. And then you still need to deal with how open are these networks. And you'll see that most banks and financial institutions are actually thinking of building their own blockchains at this point. And so we call it on L2s, for example. Some companies are public about it, like JP Morgan. And so we'll see how that goes with permissioned and public networks and stuff. But yeah.
How confident are you about regulation passing in the US?
I mean, listen, I was here all day. I met like the Treasury and Senate people, and I'm just thrilled anyone wants to even meet me. The last 4 years, I wouldn't even have gone to Washington out of fear of, I don't know, being put in the back of a van or something. And so I feel very, very good. I think more than anything, we need to start with just having rules. I don't even care if they're bad rules, but they just need to be applied consistently. And so I think the first batch of rules is going to be good enough. It's really hard to regulate crypto, and so we're going to need a couple of iterations, but I'm very positive.
Chris, is there a role in regulation in trying to manage just general digital security risk?
So, I mean, there's a lot of regulation out there already today as it relates to cyber. And some of it is industry self-regulating, some of it is government regulations. It varies wildly by country. And I think also there's the element of whether it's a security regulation or a privacy regulation. That's another area where we've seen a lot of explosive growth. So I think from a cybersecurity perspective, I think the industry has got a fairly good level of rigor. And I think a lot of organizations also are driven to want to do the right thing, partially also because it's more than just the regulatory impacts. It is the reputation, the impact to the operations of their organization. We find it for many entities, it's not just the fear of if we're not compliant with the regulation, but it's this malware, this threat actor can shut down our operations and we can no longer operate. I've seen that many, in the manufacturing, for example, industry where they get hit with a ransomware attack and they file for bankruptcy. They're not able to continue. And so you could potentially apply regulations to it, but in some of these cases, they're looking at it from a business continuity and a resiliency standpoint, probably even before they're looking at it from a regulatory standpoint.
Do you find that end customers care or are aware of what the level of security that of the vendors that they're going to, or the companies they're going to? Do they? I know they sort of think about it. Do they actually make consumer decisions based on this company safer rather than that company?
So I would say yes, and personally we see it. We have a lot of organizations that reach out to us to do things like vendor risk assessments, cyber risk quantification, where they actually want to measure the risk of working with a particular party. And then also what they will typically do is do that on an ongoing basis. So it's not just a matter of, I contract with you and I feel you're a safe partner to work with today, but that is something that I then repeatedly refresh over time to make sure that you don't just do something in order to get the contract and later on you stop doing all those security controls. So we are seeing it now. I will say that the fact that we saw third-party risk increase that much tells us there's obviously a lot more room for improvement. But I think the fact that organizations do that is a good sign that they recognize there's a need, and obviously there's more that organizations need to do to lean in.
Konstantin, do you think end customers, people who buy crypto, are they really rigorously looking at the people they invest with?
No, I mean, I think what happens is crypto is so, because it's pure money, right? It's so greed-driven. And so I think when people see yield and an opportunity for upside, a lot of the logic thinking leaves the table. And we've seen that even if you look back to FTX on very basic premises, like the companies have boards and stuff, which seems to be very obvious governance questions that obviously people like to not ask if they can, you don't want to look a gifted horse in the mouth, I think. So if it goes well, then you're kind of incentivized to not probe too much. I think one of the things we've seen, and we're one of the few idiots really who never left the US. We're one of maybe there's 20 significant crypto companies that are domiciled in the US that actually are still around from 2020, 2021. And it came at a huge cost, but we do it because we think that in the future it's very important for entities to work with vendors for technology that are domiciled in the US, that have actually audited financials, that apply to normal compliance and security and technology standards. But it's interesting to me that a lot of procurement processes don't look at those type of structures of who are the investors, who is the cap table, who actually controls the company via the different shareholder classes and things. It gets complicated in crypto, specifically in DeFi. When you talk about a DAO, for example, then it's how do you really evaluate who owns it and who controls it? And so it really requires a new rule set, right? And so ultimately, we're just scratching the surface of what that looks like. But we're advocating very strongly for people to look really closely who are their technical vendors, specifically in crypto. Yeah.
So just we're running really short on time. So just one really quick question, because it feels like we are moving into a world where we all need to think much more clearly about digital security and not sort of take things for granted. You had a great anecdote backstage about the flip phone.
Oh,
just share that.
Yeah, well, I think the pinnacle for security for us is flip phones these days for two-factor authentication, for example. And so devices that are totally air-gapped from the internet. So anything that sort of touches the internet basically exposes a risk factor. And so for a lot of the wallet activity we do, we basically, it's basically you're back to pen and paper and flip phones.
Okay, so all of you go out and buy a flip phone.
From Verizon.
Yes, from Verizon.
I'll be outside.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Representative Blake Moore of Utah, House Republican Conference Vice Chair, and Kadia Goba, politics reporter at Semaphore.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Congressman Blake Moore. Blake Moore is a member of Congress and currently serves as the vice chair of the Republican Conference, representing Utah's 1st Congressional District. He sits on the very influential Ways and Means, which is doing a lot of tax stuff these days. I'll jump right into it. The other day, we reported that Trump told senators he'd consider raising taxes on higher earners. And about a week before that, the Freedom Caucus chair even told me he's open to it. But there's clearly a difference of opinion in the White House on whether to endorse this or not. Do you see any chance House leadership would be able to get the votes for higher taxes on higher earners? And if the president, especially if the president backed it fully?
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to communicate. It's good to see you. It's been a couple of better weeks back home. I do love my time in Congress, but the time in the district's even better. Yeah, let's jump right into it. A lot has gone on taxes and all these different specific provisions. I'm not going to dodge this question, but all these specific provisions are all coming together. But what you have to recognize here is that the concept of this tax bill, and you look at 2017 and how we're largely just trying to repeat what was the success of 2017's tax bill this year, is that when Democrats talk about the tax bill, they earn multiple Pinocchios from Washington Post by saying this was just a tax benefit to the wealthy, and this is just a tax break for the billionaires. It's one of those things that gets so absurd, and even, I would say more left-leaning media will report how those are blatant lies that you hear from individuals from the Democratic Party, that the 2017 tax bill was just this tax giveaway to the rich. When you decrease the amount you could write off on SALT, which generally only hits wealthier folks, and how Republicans typically like to give a tax break across the board, and that I feel is still something that we're really focused on. Digging in specifically to the various brackets, I think there's going to be work done on that. And if you create a new bracket versus just do across the board 2% cut, maybe there'll be a less percent cut. We're going to give whatever folks are going to have at the end of this year when tax cuts expire, when this tax package and these provisions expire, there will be a tax relief and a tax break to everybody. Will the way the parameters be a little different than in 2017? Possibly. But if you compare after the provisions expire to whatever we end up coming up with, it will still be a tax break to everybody. And that's a key important part. We're actually not going to be raising the taxes on anybody. We're going to make sure that these provisions don't expire, which would be a massive tax increase across the board. And candidly, it would hit the middle class even worse, because the provisions that we put in this tax bill target strong middle class tax breaks as well as lower income earners. So it'll be a tricky balance as we get back there over the next few weeks. But you can't look at it in a silo. You have to look at it as compared to what would happen if they did expire.
So let me follow up on that. So does that mean a higher tax for higher earners, but less compared to 2017?
There's possibilities for all that. It's unclear on as to where it's going to land. But again, the important part is at the end of this year, these provisions all expire, and that every single tax bracket would go up, and we're trying to make sure that can stay lower for folks.
Throughout the entire conference, we've been talking about tariffs. So I want to talk about how that possibly impacts conversations around reconciliation. Is that swaying the conversation or changing the conversation in any way around reconciliation? Are tariffs changing the conversation around reconciliation?
Yeah, I would say that sort of everything is part of the ethos, right? Everything that's going on is a big part of it. But I think we've been able to keep tariff or tax conversations about the specific policy. And as we watch the world of tariffs play out, I think you're seeing an approach that is watching what's happening in the market, what's happening in both the equities and the bond market, and general to what potentially could happen with prices. You're seeing the administration, fluctuate on some things, postponing other areas, trying to negotiate to get better deals. But there's a lot going on. I still think the two are getting done in their own silo. And, we want to make sure that we get the tax package done regardless of what's going on. But it is key. Now, you will have the debt ceiling to address, and that is obviously part of the potential reconciliation package. And so I think it's more of those factors are all sort of coming together. But what we do on the tax side is not necessarily going to impact the tariff side. You're seeing the administration go through their process on a lot of that, and hopefully we get it to the right spot.
Okay, well, can you talk about how it's impacting tariffs in that case? I'm sorry, the reconciliation talks, how tariffs are impacting the reconciliation talks, since you say they are. I mean, I talked to Mike Johnson a year ago about this. We talked about one beautiful bill. Tariffs were not an issue, so I just want to understand how they are impacting.
Well, on the onset, so a few months ago, tariffs were like, okay, we don't know how it's all going to play out, but there's a lot of discussion from the administration on tariffs. Is that going to be a revenue opportunity? And how do you take that into consideration? Because we are trying to make this bill a deficit neutral bill, right? That's a key priority for a lot of conservatives, is to make sure that we do this in a deficit neutral way. And like, what type of revenue opportunities are there from the tariff? Generally, that has, a lot of the tariffs have been proposed, have been scaled back before they've gone into effect, or have been postponed and things like that. So we're not looking at it as a revenue source. I don't love it as a revenue source because of what it would ultimately do to prices for Americans. But that's one way that it's impacted it. And the second way is, it has caused a lot of attention, and there has been a very volatile market because of it. The only thing that we would consider on the tax side because of it is we do want to make sure we signal to the American business and the American family that we're going to give you some clear and consistent outlook of what was going to take place on the tax world for the foreseeable future. And we want to extend that out as long as possible. We want to make some of these provisions as long as possible so they have the confidence to move forward. I think that's the only real way that these two really, when it comes down to it, impact each other, is if we can signal to the American worker and family that that you're going to have sound tax pro-growth tax policy for the foreseeable, that should be able to give a lot of confidence to the market.
Let's talk about timelines. While we're on taxes, leadership wants to finish work on reconciliation by Memorial Day, but that's just for the House vote, right? Okay, would you advise, how would you advise investors and executives here how to hang on? Would you advise them to hang on this date, or should they be looking at something as late as December for a final deal?
We've cleared a lot of the headway and a lot of the obstacles to be able to get this done. You've seen the House GOP stick together. There was a lot of consternation about the Senate bill coming back to us and where that budget resolution landed, and we ultimately got over that hurdle. So I think you can look back at the last few months and say, okay, the House GOP conference is very sincere about governing, and we want to accomplish something here. So we've got 4 weeks that we're going to be in session for the next 4.
That's right.
And we want to accomplish something. And until you see something else, I think you should be able to consider that we can get this done. And then I would say if the House GOP can come together, I think given where our resolution was and where the Senate resolution was, we have required stronger spending reform than the Senate has required. Not saying that means that we're more fiscally conservative than the Senate, but we all know we are. If we can get this thing done, I think you're going to see Senator Thune, Majority Leader Thune, very excited about us to be able to come together and get it to the right spot when we have our very different conference, when we have conference from D+3 districts all the way to R+30 districts. If we can come together and get this thing done, I think the Senate could easily would come together fairly quickly after. I can't speak to their timeline, but we're going to try to get this done by Memorial Day, and hopefully the Senate can do work quickly after.
All right, so I'm going to hold you to that May 30th timeline. You touched on the debt limit. I know Treasury is going to announce their X date sometime next week. How has that, or what do you think that X date will be, first of all? And then how has that impacted, or has that changed the conversation at all when you guys are talking about a date?
I'll defer to Treasury on what they're going to do for the X date. I won't have the I wouldn't communicate it even if I did know, but that'll be what they do, and we'll look to them for that. No different than we did a few years ago when we were preparing for the Fiscal Responsibility Act, right? And we just have to see what that happens, and then it sets the timeline. I mean, it's very impactful, right? This is part of governing. This is something that we have to deal with, and ever since December, we started these conversations with the incoming administration. Now, obviously, the current administration and the entire House GOP. This is not an easy hurdle to climb with regards to debt ceiling. We know, though, that if we can govern and control the outcomes of these bills, we can get more done in a reconciliation approach than we would. I sincerely think that Minority Leader Schumer would require massive spending increases or concessions on that front in order to do a bipartisan bill that would increase the debt ceiling. And it'll be tough for a lot of our members to say, hey, I'm going to vote for a debt ceiling. Many of them have never officially voted for an actual debt. We've now done it through resolution bills, but to really vote for a debt ceiling increase, it can be tough for a lot of members because they've maybe never done it or have made promises that they wouldn't to some degree. But if you're coupling it with smart spending reform, we should be able to get over this hurdle. And I think we've signaled that we're willing to do that with these two resolutions we've done.
Let me get in at least one, since this is the small business track, at least one question on small businesses. Really quickly, since there's been a lot of talk about the upcoming tax bill, including a corporate state and local tax deduction, or as an offset, or including a cap to offset additional spending. What are the chances of that happening? And then really quickly, I want to talk about SALT for Independence and how that's going to work out. So a lot of questions there. Sea salt, is that happening? Are you guys talking about that? What does that number look like if there's going to be a cap?
Absolutely. So as you bring up small business, let's keep to the forefront. One of the most important aspects of small business is 199 Cap A. And 199 Cap A is your 20% deduction on the pass-through, so your qualified business income, your QBI. If we don't get this tax bill done, that is eliminated. It's not a permanent aspect. It's eliminated. That is one of the most damaging things to small business. The other things that we're working on, you saw in last year's tax bill, the bipartisan tax bill, the Smith-Wyden, we prioritized in a bipartisan way, R&D expensing, bonus depreciation, interest deductibility. Those things are really, really important to small business. And so that's another element that we're working on. I can't say where it's going to land, but I know that, we're committed, as we've seen us do in the previous bill last year, of getting something done on this front. So those are key aspects to small business. Sea salt, or B salt, as other people want to call it. Yeah. It's absolutely a discussion. It's been a discussion for several months now. And we have to look at all angles. Things have not come together where we're finalized on what they're going to do. But it would be really, really tough to throw that on there. But there's been loopholes too. So it's a unique factor. It's definitely part of the discussion, but it's there's been no decisions made, and we're just going to have to see how that plays out over the next few weeks.
SALT is obviously a big priority for a small group of members. Where's the conference on ending tax on tips for the next 4 years?
You said SALT and the no tax on tips.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say regarding SALT, whether it's B salt, individual salt, it's obviously been a dominated discussion since TCJA went into effect. and it will, it'll get a chance to sort of how this all plays out, and it will, we'll be able to communicate where things are once we land on how that all plays out. But I would
And
say,
where are you on tax on tips?
and tax on tips
Or
is
no
a
tax on
priority.
tips? Yeah.
No tax on tips is a large priority for the administration. President Trump talks about it a lot. He talked about it a lot on the campaign trail. He's made commitments to it, and we want to be able to help deliver this for him. And we wouldn't be writing this tax bill if we didn't have the White House, and Senate. And so we'll see. The irony is Democrats agree with it too, and they're all going to vote against this bill. I would actually say that if you look at the structure and the specifics of the bill that we're going to put forward, that you would get broad support from Democrats on the vast majority of these items. They'll find a few things here or there that they say they don't love. And they did that in 2017, but when you're talking doubling the standard deduction, you're talking child tax credit, and you're talking small business provisions that make that so they can thrive, like, Democrats agree with all of it, and they're all going to vote against it. And they are going to communicate disingenuously that this is just some tax break for the wealthy, and the vast majority of the provisions don't benefit the wealthy, and some might even like a SALT cap was something that the wealthy people were frustrated with last time around. So that's the nature of politics, unfortunately. But it's going to be a good, strong, sound, pro-growth, pro-economy tax bill that supports families and workers, and let's go get this done by the week of May 19th. So there's nothing else to talk about for the rest of the year.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it, Congressman.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Good to
Take
see you.
care. Likewise. Thank you.
Please welcome back Bennett Richardson, General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs at Semaphore.
Everybody, just wanted to quickly say thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to all of our great journalists like Kadia and our speakers for convening such great conversations this afternoon. That concludes day 2 of the World Economy Summit. So thanks again for being here. Hope to see you back tomorrow morning. We have 4 more tracks, really newsy, important topics: consumer confidence, AI and the current tech revolution, future of work and the global workforce, the future of healthcare. So some tremendous programming tomorrow. So hope to see you right back here tomorrow morning. Thanks so much for being here.